So the tabernacle was in the center of the camp with the 12 tribes of Israel camped all around. 3 tribes on each side. 3, 3, 3, 3. So if you look at the flag, you can see where the placement or the position of each tribe, where they camped around the tabernacle. And the tabernacle in the center. The first thing that we see when coming into the courtyard is the copper altar. The altar was made of acacia wood, covered in copper, and inside was the eternal fire. God was the one who started the fire when they first built the tabernacle, but it was called the eternal fire because they were never allowed to let it burn out. Every day, the Levites had to go out and find wood to make sure that fire kept burning continuously. And of course, this is where they made many sacrifices. Many sacrifices, different kinds of sacrifices with different purposes and different reasons. But there was one type of sacrifice that was the most important. It was called the atonement sacrifice. It was a yearly sacrifice done once a year and only by the high priest. All the other sacrifices should be done by the regular priest. Behind the altar here is the copper wash base. The wash base, was made of pure copper, and it was made from the mirrors of the women that donated their mirrors, polished copper, to make the wash base. So it's very likely that the priests saw their own reflection when they had looked in here. They didn't wash their hands like this because then it would have filled up with blood and dirt. Instead, they would wash their hands, they would take the water outside, it would wash their hands and their feet outside of the wash base. And they had to do that before making a sacrifice or before going into the tent. This represents purification, that we need to be purified before we can enter into God's presence. But if that's the case, then why wouldn't this be the first thing that we see when coming into the courtyard? Why would God command them to place first the altar and then the wash base? Because we cannot be purified without there being a sacrifice first. This is like an image of the process of salvation. God is trying to show that through the sacrifice we are purified. Through the blood, God purifies us, and then we can enter into his presence. So let's go in and see what's in there.
Forward po yung iba. Forward so that it will be hard for the guide to explain.
All right. So, come in a little bit further. That way everyone can fit in. All right. So, the whole compound can be divided into 3 sections. The first section is outside, called the courtyard, in which only the tribe of Levi were allowed to enter in. Within the Levites were a small family who were the priests. The priests were from the tribe of Levi, but they did all of the holy work, and the rest of the Levites who were not priests did all of the logistical work. So the second part is this room that we're all standing in. This is called the holy place. In here, only the priests were allowed to come in. The third part is the most important. It's the room here in the back called the Holy of Holies, in which only the high priest was allowed to enter in, and only once a year. Which day of the year? Yom Kippur, correct. The Day of Atonement. The same day that he was to make the sin sacrifice for the people. If you look at one side over here, you'll see the table, exactly, the table of showbread. On the table were 12 loaves of bread. Why 12? Correct. It represents the 12 tribes. It represents God's provision for the 12 tribes of Israel. Not just the priests and the Levites, but for all of Israel. And how many months are there in a year? 12. God provides all year long, not just at specific times, but God provides for all of his people and all the time. But it's only symbolic because only the priests were allowed to eat from the bread, and they ate it on Shabbat every week. Throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus many times says, I am. And in many of these I ams, he's referencing different items in the temple and the tabernacle. And it's important to keep in mind the context of who he says these things to. He's talking to, in many cases, the Pharisees. These are educated, learned Jews who know exactly what he's talking about when he says, for example, I am the gate, in which he's referencing the gate of the courtyard. Or when he says, I am the bread of life, he's referencing the showbread. Or when he says, I am the light of the world, he's talking about exactly the menorah, the golden lampstand. You'll see if you look at the other side there. The menorah was made of pure gold, and it was made of one solid piece of gold, meaning they didn't take different pieces and attach it or weld them together, but rather they took one big chunk of gold and they shaped it and molded it into that beautiful piece of artwork that you see there. And it didn't burn with a candle like we would think of today, but rather with olive oil and a piece of string that came out the front. It was the only source of light in the whole room. So try to imagine for a moment, if all the walls were covered in gold, all of that light would have reflected off the walls and light up the whole room. Probably one of the most beautiful things I can imagine. That represents Jesus as the light of the world. But do you remember what I said in the beginning, that we are the tabernacle of God?
Yes.
So just as the walls of the tabernacle reflected the light of the menorah, so are we to reflect the light of Jesus, because he is the source of light. Over here next to me is the altar of incense, or the altar of fragrance. Here, they did not sacrifice animals like they did outside. But here, every day, the priests had to offer up incense. What is that? They would take all sorts of different plants and herbs and flowers and grind it into a very fine powder, sprinkle it on the altar of incense, and it would fill the whole room with a beautiful smell, with a beautiful aroma. This represents prayer. It represents the prayers of the Israelites going up to heaven, but it also represents our prayers today as being like a sweet and beautiful smell to the Lord. In Psalm 141, David says, let my prayers be like an incense, like a sweet perfume to you, O God. Over here, well, a regular priest was dressed only in white with the head covering. But the high priest had a far more beautiful outfit. There's a whole chapter dedicated just to the clothes of the high priest. Exodus chapter 28 describes in detail all the different pieces and colors and layers that he had to wear. Like on his breastplate, he had the 12 tribes of Israel. Each tribe had its own precious stone to represent it. On his shoulders were written the 12 sons of Jacob according to age that they were born, from oldest to youngest, from Reuben to Benjamin. On the bottom, he had these bells. You mind ringing the bells there? Want to ring the bells loud and clear for everyone to hear? You hear that? That was for the Israelites to hear the bells and know that the high priest was nearby. He had a very, very, very important role. He was the mediator between God and Israel. He was the representative, the ambassador. On Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, he was the only person in the entire compound. No one else was allowed even into the courtyard on that day. And on that day, he wasn't dressed like this. He was dressed only in white, like a regular priest. The rest of the year, he was dressed all colorful and fancy. But Yom Kippur, he had to come in humble and pure before the Lord. First, he would offer a personal sacrifice for himself, and then make the sacrifice for all of Israel. Then he would walk in with the blood of that sacrifice into the Holy of Holies and sprinkle the blood on the Ark of Covenant. And that would atone and cover the sins of Israel for the past year. Now, it's really, really important to keep in mind that it was the high priest who had to make that sacrifice on behalf of Israel and not the Israelites for themselves. Why? Exactly. Jesus is our high priest. The book of Hebrews compares Jesus and the high priest multiple times to each other. Just as the high priest was the only one who could make the sacrifice for Israel, Jesus is the only one who can make the sacrifice for us. And the reason for that is because there is nothing we can do in our own power to receive forgiveness of sin. It is only by the power and love and grace of God. We cannot pay for our own sins. We need someone above us who is able to pay that price for us. So God paid that price for us through Jesus because we can't. Now, we are a few too many people to be able to fit into the Holy of Holies all at once. So when I'm done with the tour, then you may come in into the Holy of Holies, take pictures, and then exit through the back door. So in the Holy of Holies was the Ark of Covenant. Inside the ark were three things. What were inside the ark? The rod of, not of Moses, but of Aaron. Yes, close enough. Manna and, correct, the 2 tablets with the 10 commandments. Each of these 3 items, the staff of Aaron, the jar of manna, and the 2 tablets with the 10 commandments, each represented a different aspect of our relationship with God. The staff of Aaron, who was Aaron? He was the brother of Moses. He was the first high priest. It was through the staff that God showed the Israelites that he indeed had chosen Aaron to be the first high priest, and that it wasn't just nepotism just because he's Moses' brother. I spoke about how the high priest is the mediator. So the staff represents the mediator, but the staff also represents Jesus as the mediator, in that it blossomed with flowers, right? It's like a dead stick that came back to life. Does it remind you of anything?
Amen.
Exactly. It represents Jesus' resurrection from death. The jar of manna represents God's provision in our lives, just as he provided the manna for the Israelites when they were in the desert. God continuously provides for us day by day. And the 10 Commandments is the covenant between us and God. That anyone who keeps the 10 Commandments 100% will have a perfect relationship with God. But there's a problem. We, as sinners, these are 3 things that we need in order to have a relationship with God, are the mediator, the provision, and the covenant. But we, as sinners, have rejected and broken all of these things. The staff, the mediator, on a worldwide scale, we have rejected Jesus as the Messiah, in the same way that the Israelites rejected Aaron as the high priest. They didn't accept what God had chosen to be. The manna, well, the Israelites complained about the manna. They said, we don't want this. We want meat. We want to go back to Egypt. Even today, we complain and complain instead of being thankful for everything God does for us. But despite our complaints, despite our unfaithfulness, God continuously provides for us in the same way that he provided for the Israelites, despite how much they were complaining. And the 10 Commandments, obviously we have broken the 10 Commandments. All of us, and I mean all of us, have broken all 10 of the 10 Commandments. Sure, we probably didn't physically murder anyone. I would hope not. But Jesus says if you think about hating your brother in your heart, that's just as bad as actually murdering them. And if you look at a woman with lust, that's just as bad as actually committing adultery. Of course, we've all lied, we've all stolen, we've all coveted, we've all dishonored our parents, and worst of all, we've all dishonored God directly, and therefore have broken our relationship with God through our sins. So we've broken and rejected these 3 things that we need in order to have a relationship with God. But here's the thing. On Yom Kippur, the high priest came in with the blood into the Holy of Holies, sprinkled that blood on top of the ark, symbolizing God looking through the blood onto what connects us to him, showing that it's only through blood that we can be in a relationship with God. When God looks down on the ark, he doesn't see these three things that we have rejected and broken. He sees the blood that covers it. So only through blood we can be in a relationship with God. Only through blood we can repair that relationship with God that has been broken by sin. Now, all of these things throughout the Old Testament, throughout all these sacrifices and ceremonies and rituals, all of that was all just a temporary solution that God gave in order to foreshadow or prophesy about the ultimate solution, which is the blood of Jesus that covers us today once and for all. So, thank you for coming. May God bless you. You may come in to the Holy of Holies and exit through the back.
Yeah.